and welcome. I'm Antonina Antosh and you are watching Head to Head with UATV. Ukrainian judicial reform, very important one among others being implemented or planned, has kicked off almost 2 years ago. The first visible result is the newly elected Supreme Court body, the procedure that has become famous for its strict rules on transparency and public control. But judicial system is not only about the Supreme Court. What else is to be done to provide justice for all citizens at Ukrainian courts? To discuss this issue, we're joined in the studio today by Mykhaylo Zhernakov, Director of DEJURE Foundation and Senior Expert on Judicial Reform at Reanimation Package of Reforms, Ukrainian largest NGOs coalition. Hello, Mykhaylo, and thank you for coming.
Hi, thanks for having me.
All right, so could you please stop a little bit on the peculiarities of the judicial reform currently being implemented in Ukraine?
Well, first of all, let me point out that the increased or unprecedented transparency of the Supreme Court selection is a myth. And while it is true that it was increased compared to what we had before, the Ukraine under Yanukovych is not exactly a benchmark to which we're looking for. So,
okay, how does the real situation look like?
While it is true that the transparency was increased compared to what we had before, this is not exactly what we're looking for. What we wanted to see is the objective, competitive, transparent selection, and unfortunately, there are, first of all, many judges who now are judges of the Supreme Court who do not correspond to the integrity criteria. There is a number, at least 27 out of 117 newly appointed judges to this new Supreme Court, either were involved in the dubious decision-making or cannot justify their assets, or were involved in the political persecution. Some of them imprisoned Yuri Lutsenko, the current Prosecutor General of Ukraine, when he was an opposition politician, and it was recognized by the European Union, by the Council of Europe, by Ukraine itself as a political persecution, and still they somehow got into the new Supreme Court. So what we really think as civil society is that the procedure should be changed, and most importantly that the judicial governance bodies should be changed.
Does it mean that the before announced procedure as being transparent and true and fair, does it mean that it failed? And the results could be not as effective as we expect?
Yes, we already see that the results are not exactly what was expected, because, again, there are so many candidates who are now judges that obviously do not correspond to the criteria that was set for this competition, and still they're there. And the High Qualification Commission of Judges that was responsible for the selection just shrugs and says, well, that's how we selected them, and that's what we think is right, even though there were many good contestants during the competition.
If we try to change that now and have a re-election, will it set the reform back?
No, I would say it would set the reform forward, because by doing this competition, we actually took the wrong turn in the reform, because we had really good steps, such as amendments to the Constitution that depoliticized the judiciary for large parts, and that set other good rules, and we actually had not bad laws. But one big mistake we made is that we gave all the decision-making power to the same judges that we want to change as a part of the reform. The vast majority of these judicial governance bodies, the High Qualification Commission of Ukraine and the High Council of Justice, are composed of judges elected by judges, by the same judges we want to change. So this is an obvious conflict of interest.
This even sounds weird, you know?
Exactly.
Okay, but the Supreme Court is not the one instance that is supposed to bring justice to Ukraine. There is also Special Court on Intellectual Property and Special Anti-Corruption Court. Now, is there really a need in Ukraine for those two instances to appear, or is it just another attempt to create places for the old judges to be put to work?
Right. A very valid question, because as of now, there's also a qualification assessment, or the reattestation of all the judges that is going on. And there, we also see, for example, the first stage, the written exam that the judges took, only 0.2% failed at this test. So we see that the vast majority, 99.8% of judges are going through, and this is this is something that is expected also to happen as a result of the interview.
I'm surprised there were people who even failed, because if there is a working judge who is performing his work and ruling in court, actually fails the test.
Well, again, we would expect this number to be much higher, because unfortunately there are so many judges who are not qualified and who don't correspond to the integrity criteria.
How can we change that? How can we educate the judges to be the way we want them to be in future for Ukraine with a clear and transparent justice system?
Well, first of all, I think education should start not when they become judges. It should start with a school, and then with the university, and then we have to train our lawyers properly, and then we have to select them properly, and that's how the whole system should work. And that is why there's a bad need for change in the legal education system and access to legal profession. But also, of course, it matters much how we select these judges to their positions. And unfortunately, again, if we give it all to we place it all in the hands of the old guard, of the old judges, the same judges that we want to change, then we have a systemic problem.
A system error, you know.
Or system error.
How can we actually turn it this way, that regular citizens also take part in this process?
One of the good things that we had is the direct participation of the public in the process. Unfortunately, the Public Integrity Council that was set for by the amendments to the Law on Judiciary and Status of Judges, it's a civic body composed of members of the civil society, lawyers, legal scholars, human rights defenders. So
anyone could go in there and get judicial help?
Well, not exactly anyone, but so there's a procedure how they're selected. There should be reputable lawyers or journalists, or those who understand and who know what's going on, who know how to assess judicial integrity. But it is very important to know that Ukrainian citizens trust much more to the representatives of the public and to the international experts than they trust the Ukraine's judiciary, because judiciary is at the moment the least trusted institution.
Which leads me to the next question. Is it actually possible that after the judicial reform is implemented, people's trust in the judiciary system in Ukraine will actually rise, or will it remain the same on a critically low level that it is right now?
That very much depends on the performance of the courts, because trust is, we don't have that many trust issues. We do have a huge issue with underperformance of the courts, because people see how the courts are ruling in many cases very badly and very unfairly. So to change that, we have to have judges in place who will provide justice, both in terms of regular adjudication between the two parties, and in terms of finally placing the corrupt officials to jail where they belong, because we have created NABU, National Anti-Corruption Bureau, a great institution that has provided in 2 years.
An anti-corruption court as well.
And the anti-corruption prosecution, but not the anti-corruption court yet. It is provided for. Yeah, it is provided for by the law, but it has to be created. And now the huge debate is, how do we select judges there? How do we not repeat the same mistakes that we made with the Supreme Court competition?
Could it be that it's just the trick to postpone the creation of the Supreme Anti-Corruption Court, so that people who are actually corrupt do not end up behind bars?
Well, it was debated for 2 years already. There's a provision in the law that the Anti-Corruption Court should be created, but it wasn't before the special law is introduced that has to define who's selected how and the procedures and so on. Finally, it was introduced by the president. It was heavily criticized by the international experts, by the civil society in Ukraine, as such as not corresponding to the recommendations of the Venice Commission that clearly said international experts in this selection procedure, taking into account the specific situation in Ukraine, should have a... Yeah, it's a very diplomatic way to say your judicial governance doesn't work.
Yeah.
They say the crucial role should be given to international experts on anti-corruption.
And I agree.
And I do agree too. And moreover, the people of Ukraine agree. 41% of people trust the international experts, while only less than 10% trust the Ukrainian judges to select the anti-corruption
All right, judges is one way. What about attorneys? The attorney monopoly is promised to be created, and it would include only certified attorneys who will be allowed to represent clients' interests in courts. How effective will that work out for Ukraine?
This is one of the most debated issues, actually, inside the big judicial reform, as we call it. It was provided for or set by the amendments to the Constitution. We're, by the way, the first and the only country in the world to adopt monopoly of the advocates or of the attorneys on the constitutional level.
Yeah, because usually monopoly carries a negative sense.
Right. The legitimate aim is to increase proficiency of the debate inside the courtroom, so the only certified attorneys could be...
Which is a good goal.
Which is a good goal, but then the question is, how do we select and how do we certify these attorneys? Unfortunately, the system of Ukraine's bar and certification and examination is also far from perfect, and it has to be improved, and it has to be demonopolized, because it in itself is monopolized. There's only one association of attorneys in Ukraine, which is ruled, by the way, by people very closely connected to the previous government, to the previous regime, that we also
have to change.
It's like a tradition
already, you know.
Yes, well, no change is done overnight, and we have to be
True.
patient.
That's true.
But we have to take really, active measures and effective measures to fight the old system and to create a new one.
Well, clearly, Ukraine has a long way to go, but we are on the way and we're going in with large steps. So,
absolutely, yes.
Thank you so much for coming and sharing this information with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
That was Mykhaylo Zhernakov. He is the director of DEJURE Foundation and an expert on judicial reform. Thank you so much for watching. Stay with UATV.